Hello, and welcome to today's episode of Her Version. This podcast is dedicated to sharing stories of struggle to triumph, a platform that allows individuals to tell their truth in order to inspire and uplift others. For those of you that are new to this podcast and like content like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Make sure you follow, like, and share. I am your host, Sabrina Victoria. Let's jump right in. Hello, and thank you for joining us today for this episode of Her Version. The Her Version platform is built on storytelling and the understanding that many times our greatest learning experiences come from learning from other people's stories. Today, I am speaking with an amazing woman named Kat. Kat remembers vividly hiding from bombshelling in her family's basement with no radio and no TV when she was 10 years old. She had to abruptly leave school when a terrible civil war erupted in Lebanon. She remembers her dad turning to alcohol for solace before her parents separated and how much she yearned to escape her life. Over the past few decades, she was able to leave that situation, travel, and undergo some intensive work to heal the trauma caused by her father. Kat is here today to talk about rising above our current situation and growing into a life that we are proud of despite our past. Welcome, Kat. How are you?
Thank you so much for having me, Sabrina. I'm doing great. Yourself?
Yes. Thank you. And you just informed me, which I feel horrible considering I have an all-female platform, that today is what?
International Women's Day, March 8th.
Yes. What a day to be chatting.
I know. I feel it's very symbolic and powerful.
Yes. I love that. So how has your day been? How's your Tuesday?
It's great. It's exciting. I've been checking social media and making sure I shout out all the amazing women who have been so supportive in my life and on my journey. And I think what's really symbolic about this day is that we just recognize the strength in women out there and how much they do and how much they work to really build the fabric of society. We're very much supportive, relational beings as women, and we were always looking to build and grow and put together things.
100%. I agree. Yeah, we're constantly building emotionally, physically, mentally, which is all good. We've come a long, long way. Even just from, my grandmother's generation to my mother's generation, the gaps emotionally and mentally between myself and even just two generations back is amazing. And I'm so grateful to be living in the age that I'm in, and the education and the information that we have at our fingertips.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And our ability to build on what the past generation has given us and to grow our self-awareness and that of our children in the next generation.
Yes, 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 yes. I agree. That was actually one of the issues with myself as far as creating a platform was for the generations to come. It's kind of like if, some of us have to kind of stand up and start speaking loudly the information that we're aware of in order to kind of shake, the generations to come and kind of get them to see things a little bit differently.
Yeah, and to model for them what it means to speak up, what it means to speak out, what it means to stand in our power. And that's the important part because, yeah, maybe we will be doing things that are shaking up our present, but for our children, it might be, we might sound like old people, right? Like my grandmother was very avant-garde in her time, but now I look back and I'm like, yeah, but what she did is she inspired my mother, who in turn inspired me to really, go against the grain and be our own person.
100%. 100%. Well, listen, we have so much to cover with your story, and I would love to kind of just hand the mic over to you for, a little bit of time to kind of have you be able to share your journey and your story and kind of some of the things that you've gone through in your life. Would you mind stepping into that and sharing some of your past with us?
Absolutely. I know in your intro we talk about my childhood, and I'll cover that briefly because I think um, our childhood shapes who we are and what challenges we tend to face as adults, what obstacles we see as big and looming, even though they may not be there for other people. So, as a kid, I grew up in Lebanon with in a foreign family. My parents were raised abroad; they were not raised in Lebanon, and so we always had this sense of otherness growing up in Lebanese culture. And then that was compounded by the war, where we, had to kind of stick together and not really integrate into society. And then that was further compounded by my father, who had trouble coping with the entire environment and the situation. And so his coping mechanism was addiction, unfortunately. But I think what that did for us, or for me specifically, I won't speak about anyone else, is that it made the world seem like a scary place. It made it very difficult for me to reach out and talk to people and connect and assert my presence or feel seen and heard. And so the result of that childhood is that my whole life has been an effort to fix that, right? Like an effort to have fun as an adult, an effort to find my voice as an adult, an effort to connect socially with people and in community as an adult, an effort to be seen and heard and recognized, and also to see my own value. Because when you're in survival mode, you're not really busy thinking about, oh, is my child, feeling enough love, or is my child feeling seen or heard enough, right? Like we were literally hiding in the basement. We had sacks of sand that my brothers and my dad would stack outside so that the shrapnel wouldn't come into our house.
Wow.
Um, I still remember very vividly when there was a ceasefire, we'd go out into the garden and we would pick shrapnel from the garden. We would look at the shapes of the bits of, exploded bombs. And it doesn't seem shocking to me because that was my normal, but I know it's shocking to other people.
Yeah.
um, but like I said, the impact of growing up like that is something that's a lifelong effort to change and to establish a different kind of a normal for myself.
Definitely. Do you, now looking back, do you feel as if there had to be some fear? Was there fear, first of all?
I'm pretty sure there was. I mean, I was 10 at the peak, at the worst of it, and I'm pretty sure I was scared. Um, I'm trying to remember. I think when you have traumatic experiences like that, you disconnect emotionally, honestly. And the first time I spoke to a therapist about this experience and he used the word trauma, I was taken aback. I was like, was that traumatizing? That wasn't traumatizing. Was that trauma? Is that really trauma? Like, I had never categorized that experience as traumatic because that was just what it was. And so I think I was in my early 30s the first time a therapist said that to me. And so I believe I completely disassociated from myself or what I felt to protect myself.
Yeah. So I always find this so interesting. I hear so many women who come on this podcast talk about trauma
Mhm.
and the meaning of trauma and the trauma in accordance to what they've been through their journey. And it's interesting how so many of us don't view it as trauma. So I want to ask, what I 100% understand where you're coming from, but what is trauma to you? So you didn't view that as trauma.
Mhm.
What is trauma?
Now as an adult, I look back and I always think trauma is something worse than where I was, right? Like it's always something just a little bit worse. It's maybe not having a home or a shelter to hide in and being exposed, or knowing somebody having a sibling who, was a victim of the war, or it always feels like trauma is just that one or two places worse than where I am.
It's interesting, huh?
Yeah. And I did need a lot of help from therapy and from mind body skills groups to recognize that it was trauma, to recognize the impact it had emotionally and psychologically.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting just hearing your story because, now looking at my story, which is not as bad as your story, I have also endured trauma. But my trauma, when I view a definition of trauma, it would be similar to what you endured. So for me, it's like, "Oh my gosh, that's traumatic over there." But then you're viewing your life cycle as the same way I'm viewing my life cycle, as it just is. It just is, and we have to learn how to survive, and I just find that so interesting how important it is as we grow and we evolve to allow ourselves to realize that there has been stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think a big part of that is the education that comes alongside of our experiences, where you do have a specialist who says this is a traumatic event. I mean, even something as small as being late to pick up your child at school, like very late, not 5 minutes, but maybe half an hour, where they feel scared. They're wondering where's mom or dad.
Yeah,
Did something happen to them? That is traumatic,
yeah,
right?
yeah, interesting.
I recently got very deeply into mind body skills, which are very focused on healing trauma. So I've become a mind body skills practitioner. I run mind body skills groups. And as a result of these groups that I'm running, now I'm starting to realize how all of us have endured some sort of trauma,
Mhm.
right? Like a trauma really is a harsh experience that interrupts the normal process of a life.
Yeah,
So we've all endured trauma. We all need to work on healing trauma. We all need to work on better understanding who we are, better recognizing our feelings and emotions and what they mean to us, and better managing our behavior when we understand that, not reacting, but being deliberately intentional about how we choose to act as a result of the emotions we're feeling. And
yeah,
this needs to be part of our mainstream education alongside science and math and everything else.
definitely. One of the difficulties that I've had that I would appreciate your opinion on is what's the difference between healing from your trauma and minimizing your trauma?
Hmm. So for a long time, I think I minimized my trauma, where I was like, it wasn't a big deal. It was my normal. I'm unaffected by it. It was really just, brushing it aside. I think the difference is, sweeping the dust to a corner versus actually vacuuming.
Got it. Yeah.
um, you sweep to the dust to the corner, and then every time somebody passes by, it kind of wafts back into the middle of the room. But when you heal, you're picking it up, and it doesn't mean, again, in my groups, I have participants who are like, yeah, but I worked on this. I thought I healed the trauma.
Yeah.
It's never fully healed. Every time you heal one level, you go further, right? Like you go deeper, you heal another level, and you can heal personally, and then you can heal transgenerationally as well. There is trauma that we carry that is transmitted to us through cellular memory,
Yeah.
right? My background is science and engineering, so I very much focus on the science when I talk about these things, because I need to be convinced that I'm not, talking something woo-woo, that it's supported by science, but science supports this idea of cellular, of memories being passed on by genetics.
Yeah.
And so trauma that our grandparents have endured is passed on to us,
Yeah.
especially as women, because let's say my grandmother is pregnant with my mother, she endures a trauma. My mother in utero already has her eggs. I am already an egg in my mother's ovaries while she is in the womb of my grandmother. So the three of us, all three generations, are enduring that trauma that my grandmother is living through.
Wait a minute. Say that again.
It's mind-blowing, and I have the science that backs it. But let's say my grandmother is in a World War II.
Okay.
She's enduring a very traumatic experience. She has not had children yet, or she was pregnant with my mother.
Okay.
My mother in utero, in my grandmother's body, in her stomach, already has her eggs formed. There, I am already an egg.
Wow.
And so my grandmother's trauma is my mother's trauma is my trauma.
Wow. The vibrations can I get that.
The memory gets into the cells, the
Yeah.
genetics, the epigenetics, the genes that turn on as a result of that trauma are activated. And so what research has found is that if your grandparents have endured extreme trauma, you are more likely to be susceptible to stress. You're more affected by stress. You are more anxious. You're more, just because of what your grandparents endured, because of
Wow.
that transgenerational memory.
Since we're on this subject, I'm sure that you probably know the, like, mouse and cherry blossom.
Oh no, I don't recognize that.
Oh, then I don't wanna bring it up because I don't know exactly how it goes, but it was something to the effect of now I feel bad. Doesn't
Oh,
matter. Anyways, something with mice, though. It was something with mice, and the mice, like, every time they smelled cherry blossoms, like, something bad would happen. Um, like, they would do something to them, and
oh,
then, the next generation, like, the same thing, and then what they found is, like, even though the bad thing never happened anymore, those same mice, generation after generation, none of them would go near the cherry blossoms.
that's exactly it.
Yeah.
That's the same principle.
Yes, and I feel bad that I don't remember that whole thing, but that's okay. That's part of a live podcast.
Yeah, but we'll put a link somewhere.
Yes, yes, I'll have to look that up so I remember it correctly next time. Um